what is at the heart of negativity? If we go into different types of negativity like anger or worry, jealousy, regret, what do we find? I've talked about my particular style of introspection before, especially in my video on introspection or contemplation, where I love to dig as deep as I can and keep going down, try to simplify and find that core belief. Now, recently I've been looking at negative aspects in my life, and I talked about in a video on anger. Another thing I looked into was sarcasm. And these are both connected. Now, how they're connected is very interesting and kind of led me down a different path. So I want to talk about that. So I've already talked about anger in the previous video. So I want to talk about sarcasm. And just one thing I was noticing was at certain times with my kids, how I would be sarcastic. And I saw my kids doing that, reflecting that back to me, and I didn't like that. So I wanted to get rid of sarcasm, or at least understand it. And so it's very easy to see what sarcasm is. It's not a positive action. There is the place for sarcasm if you're being funny. I was not. So I went in and I looked at how it made me feel, how it made the other person feel. And I could see, obviously, all the negative aspects of it, but how I was doing this instead of getting angry. And so I was being sarcastic instead of saying something, well, yelling or saying something in an angry fashion. And I talked about anger in that other video where I was getting angry because I don't know what to do. And, well, I kept going deeper. And what I saw is there was pain there, hidden behind the sarcasm, behind the anger. Something that I didn't feel good enough, or I made some mistake, and I could get angry, or I could say something sarcastic. Now, I think I've talked about in other videos where when we have these negative emotions, I'm saying negative, but they all have a purpose, and they're actually, think of them as trying to protect us. So I get angry because I don't want to deal with this pain that's under that. So I get angry. Why angry? Well, angry is me doing something. Just like I talked about in my video on worry. Worrying is doing something. Oh, sure, it's negative. It's not good, but I'm doing something and I'm not having to deal with the pain that's actually the problem. Okay, so I saw this. I saw this with the anger. I saw this with the sarcasm. I saw this with any negative emotion. Now, I've read about this before, and a very good book goes into this is The Book of Not Knowing by Peter Ralston, which I highly recommend. And so this all made sense analytically, logically, but I was seeing it clear. And a lot of the times with this work, and I think I've talked about before, you see something and, okay, you don't do anything. And you see it and you don't do anything. And then just someday, for some reason, finally that question comes up and goes, well, why is that? And so I finally decided to look into it. And so going down into negativity was something I avoided I say negativity, I'm going to say fear, because at the bottom is fear. This is something always avoided of obvious reasons. This is the thing that you want above all else to avoid. This is the pain, the most painful pain, the worst fears. Well, let's go into them. So, I thought about my worst fears, and I've come across them before, face to face. And I'll talk about that in another video. So I had a good place to start with, and I refined my group of fears and looked at them. And the big thing I noticed was, okay, how does fear work? What action are done when there is fear? Well, we can look at what is the body's reaction. So increased heart rate, we know what happens. Now, when there's a situation that is dangerous, well, that is a useful thing. I don't know, we call that fear, but maybe we need another word for it, or some different words. I'm not talking about that fear. But we still have that same physical feeling, or we can. Raised heart rate, the feeling in the stomach. Okay. Well, let's say we don't have that. What else is fear? What is it? How does fear manifest? What actions do we do? Well, in the physical sense, we run away. And in the mental sense, psychological sense, spiritual sense, we do the same thing. We avoid. So what I noticed was, what happens if I don't avoid? I go into the fear, and I went into the worst things I could think about and sit with them. Now, I thought I was going to have some big insight, like this revelation of that's what it is. But instead, I felt nothing. Looking face to face with fear, there was nothing there. Well, was I making a mistake? Was I not getting into it? Was I not focused on it enough? I kept trying to do this. I kept trying to feel that fear, but I couldn't. Now, I've done this before with other negative emotions. I don't know if it was fear or some other label that I put on the emotion, but when I looked at it face to face, there was nothing there. Now, this is something else I've read where it kind of hides in the shadows. And when we come face to face with it, direct awareness, we see that there's nothing there. Well, I saw that fear is, the action that we do with fear is avoidance. So, look at avoidance and notice when, I looked at not necessarily the worst fears, but let's say discomfort. What happens when something happens and I see my mind try to go away, go into fantasy or thinking about tomorrow or thinking about schedules or whatever. That kind of avoidance. So I sat with that and looked at avoidance. And again, I saw nothing. There was nothing there. But this is interesting that going into something deep like this, you feel that, or I feel that, there's something there. I'm going to come across a belief that is this foundational thing. And when I see it, it just is going to release, and I don't know what happens after that. But what I saw is I went into fear, went into my worst fears, and there's nothing there. I went into the action of fear, avoidance, and there's nothing there. I saw that is the nature of fear. There is nothing there. It works by kind of a magic, where if we look at it, it's nothing there. It only can work if we're not paying attention to it. Okay, but boy, this didn't seem satisfying or to match up with my experience. I've had experiences of, say, strong negativity. So is it worry or fear or whatever? I mean, to say that they don't exist, but in those moments, I'm accepting the fear. Now, I don't know if accepting is the right word, but fear is there. I'm not looking at what it is. It's there. And the fear is there, and then there's the story of whatever. So if I'm worrying, there's this. If I'm afraid, there's this. If I have a guilty or regret, it's there. I'm not examining the fear. I'm not examining the negativity. So all those times that I'm afraid or I'm sickly worried, it's just, I'm not even paying attention to that negativity. I'm accepting it. I'm focusing on the story of the negativity. What makes it worry, or what makes it fear? What makes it anger? What I see is fear does not point to something. This is something that I've noticed many times, and this is how we are in our society. We have kind of a materialist view where there are these things that act a certain way or interact with the world around. And so there is actually this fear here. And what I see is the effects of it. That's the thinking, the standard thinking. But what I see is that's not the case. Fear is the action. It's not fear of something. It is the action. It is how we notice it. Fear is avoidance. Now, this is something, again, if you look at it logically, it makes sense. What is something if you never avoid it? You have this fearful situation, but you're completely open to it. Well, whatever it is, it's not fear anymore. I mean, you can't say you're afraid, you're scared of something if you're completely open to it and accepting to it. Well, what is it? Well, what you see is there's nothing then. Fear does not exist. Fear exists in the periphery as long as you don't look at it. Again, like a trick. You're looking at it, it's gone. Well, but it was there, right? And I looked at the avoidance, and the same thing. I looked at the feeling of avoiding. But what is avoidance? It is just another movement in reality, movement of reality. What I saw, which goes back to what I'm talking about with introspection, is I saw that if I dig deep, I dig down, there's nothing there. And for my style of introspection, this is unsatisfying. To take it all the way down and then there's nothing there, you realize, well, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing to be done. Now, of course, maybe you know this, or you read about it, or you heard this from other teachers, that there's nothing to be done. Well, you can see that. But of course, there's still this habit of wanting to get the answers, wanting to become. I mean, it's a strange thing to see this, to know this on some level, which maybe, I know like Alan Watts would say, if you're saying you know it, but you don't really know it, like you want more, then you don't really know it. And I would say that's true, because then you're still having these doubts arise. You don't know it. If you knew it, it would just fall away. So, what I've seen is that there has to be a kind of falling back. Now, there is still is a drive to do something. Okay, well, there is stuff to do as long as I think there's something to do. Okay, so I can't try to let go. So what do? Well, I could say I'm stuck. Now I can sit in that nothingness, or knowing that there's nothing to do. But there is still something, this movement of a need to introspect, to look. And I can do that. Continue that. Take it back a little bit. Don't dig down as deep, and look at these things. Okay, maybe looking at these fears, the essence of fear is nothing. Okay, well then maybe come back to see these fears. Maybe come back even more to see these individual ones to work on. Is this ideal? Well, I don't think ideal really matters. It just is what it is. It is this particular pattern unraveling. So, these are the videos that I make. Myself unraveling. I think that's the best way to end it. All right, until next time.